Okay, hello everybody. This is the Nanog BCOP Best Current Operational Practices track. Welcome and thanks for coming back in the room. So this is going to be a little bit different than the traditional Best Current Operational Practices track, which has been going on roughly 2.5 years now. First, I'd just like to get a sort of sense of the room of how many of you, this is your first BCOP track attendance. Excellent. Okay, so that'll help a lot. So I'll give a little bit of history. So first, the problem statement is fairly straightforward, right? There are presentations given all over the world at all kinds of operator forums, and there are like, 50 to 100 little operator forums. And each presentation is regional and relevant at the time that it is presented. And once it's presented, they're typically archived on the respective operator site as a PowerPoint. They don't generally have any audio with them or any translated text. And you have no sense as to whether or not they're current after they're archived. Basically, as soon as a presentation is given, someone could do something different or better that is well vetted and makes it current. So the scenario is that an organization, whether they come here or they're just, an operator out in the world who doesn't participate in these meetings, is looking to solve a problem. They attempt to search for the best current operational practice or the best method of implementing a solution on your, favorite qualified search engine, and you come up with a lot of information. So it's really hard to tell what's accurate, what's current, and moreover, what's been vetted, right? There are lots of data out there that we have no idea if it's just some schmuck's opinion or if they're, the subject matter expert leader in the world. So how does the searcher know if it's current, valid, et cetera? So there are a bunch of different ways that we can solve this, and we've, tried a few different ways and looked at a bunch of different methodologies. One of which is that we could figure out a way to tie all of the given regional operator forums into a single searchable archive, ask all of the operator forums to record every single presentation getting translated into text and make that available to the world, and you can decide yourself when you're searching for a solution. Or two is we could build a new solution, something that fits in the middle of all this, where we have actual vetted solutions from operator forums that have regional best current operational practices and some means of which to get things that are vetted as a global best current operational practice into a globally available repository. So we took an attempt at something like a BCOP global repository. It started out with a few people that identified this gap. We had a great deal of dialogue on how to do this and brought it to a bunch of different RIR and operator forums. And certainly every time we walked into a room and said, would you be in support of something like this for the global internet? And everybody in the room raises their hands and goes, yes, that looks good. You should go ahead and do that, which is always great, right? Everybody wants to meet but doesn't really want to solve the problem. We've had lots of volunteers for building this kind of a solution across lots of different regions. And we took some action. So we had several meetings like this in both this region and in others to develop a process by which we could develop best current operational practice documents. It has been primarily Nanog-centric. In other words, the track has been primarily held at Nanog meetings, although we've held some other smaller regional meetings all over the world. Not really in an organized fashion, kind of just the volunteers that were available at the given regional meeting would give this a shot and check it out with the local community. We've seen that other regions have used some other methodologies, whether it's their methodology for managing documents as a whole or their idea of some kind of BCOP or BCP repository. And historically, this group's had been kind of dragged along. It hasn't really gotten to the place of being self-guided and continuing to evolve without a lot of pushing towards something that should be good for the community, and people agree that it's good community. It just hasn't really taken off yet. And while we were working through this regional process, we identified another gap, which is that it doesn't necessarily make sense for it to just be one single BCOP repository, and that things are different in different regions, and there are some things that should be global. A bit like, as Chris was referring to in the teaser, the RIR methodology for identifying that something is global, has the same text, and is adopted in all of the respective regional internet registries. So we've explored various ideas for allowing for a global solution. These, by the way, are the BCOPs to date. I just stuck this in there so people could see that there has been some progress. We do have a BCOP development process that is mostly working in the region. We have written some documents and ratified a best current operational practices document on IPv6 subnetting, configuration for public peering exchange, and there's a current draft for IPv6 peering in transit. But it's actually not the point of this particular track. So we've reassessed the situation, and this track is about a take two or an evolution of the idea behind best current operational practices. So we've had a lot of different discussions about how to scale this and what it would need to support it. We put in a good deal of effort into defining the goals, making sure that it was open, transparent, bottoms up, both regional and global, how the documents stay current, have ongoing updates, and that it was multi-stakeholder. And the idea behind this particular track was to make a template or use the Nanog regional track as an example to provide a package to send to other operator forums. Whether they want to use it or not is entirely up to them, right? But we wanted to have an example somewhere done that would make it easier for other operator forums to get involved. We created a draft for both a global process and a regional process for BCOP participants. We knew we needed some funds and some staff, some resources to actually execute the above, so it wasn't just volunteers, sort of dragging it along, but rather, an organization that really supported it and helped with awareness. And we needed to make sure that that was a neutral party, so it wasn't one particular region or one particular operator or particular RIR, but a neutral global organization to support us. So the idea is fairly simple, right? And this slide, by the way, I just used an image that has RIR names, but this is really meant to represent all of the operator forums that are all over the planet, and there are so many of them, there was no way I could stick them on a slide. The idea is that you have your own regional BCOP development process, your own regional BCOP repositories, and the ability to work with all of the other to cross-pollinate these BCOPs or make them global BCOPs. So in searching around, there are lots of similar things. I just listed a few here. So for example, RIPE 501 or 554 in the RIPE region are examples of some documents that are meant to be best current operational practices. There is the IETF BCPs, which are not entirely operationally focused, but they're good examples of how a global repository would be done for BCPs. There are individual repositories, not very well published, but they exist. And of course, there's your good old friend, your favorite qualified search engine. So what's happened in the last few months? Well, the people who have been helping volunteer for running the BCOP group asked ISOC, the Internet Society, for help facilitating the global BCOP repository and all of the supporting staff, and they agreed to help. The BCOP group asked the local Nanog board and program committee to help facilitate this region, and Nanog was more than willing to help facilitate this in this region, as you can see by this track, and it has been historically. And the BCOP drafted a new development process to accommodate that. So it's a work in progress, and it is meant to be open and bottoms up and transparent and community driven. So it is up to you to help continue to modify that. And all of the lists and facilitating stuff had been living on third-party servers, even some in my house. So we created a list, some new lists. One is bcop@nanog.org, and then another one is bcop-announce@nanog.org for announcements of documents that are being worked on, which I encourage you to join by just using the --subscribe at those lists, which Nanog has accommodated. And we're working on creating some global lists for a few different purposes. One, for work on the actual process itself, One, of course, for actual discuss conversation, and probably a similar announce list as that development process is comes to be ratified and final. So that's what's happened locally, and so at the Internet Society, they have hired Jan Jors, who is formerly of Go6 and a big participant in the RIPE region, and is now an employee of ISOC and works with the Direct 360 program and Internet Online. And he is someone I've been working with for some time to help facilitate this kind of global effort, and he's going to present the idea for a global repository. Just pull this up. There we go. Jan.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm Jan Jors. I'm coming from Slovenia, Europe. That's a RIPE region until recently. We have been discussing this BCOP thing with Aaron for a long time now, and I'm really happy that this effort and this work is taking place and going forward. So, as this is my first Nanog meeting, because I joined ISOC in December, now I'm scheduled to fly around the world to ask many NOGs about this, what other operator groups think. And as this is my first Nanog meeting, I thought it would be good that I would introduce myself a bit. I'm a founder of Slovenian Go6 Institute that put our small country in the IPv6 map as most IPv6 prepared country in the world. Yeah, I see Lee putting his thumbs up. I have more than 20 years of internet operations, so ISOC finally hired an engineer with operations background to do the job. I touched IPv6 13 years ago and been using it since then, and using it in all my projects. As Aaron mentioned, I'm an active contributing member in RIPE community. Primary code RIPE 501 and RIPE 554. That is like IPv6 requirements for the ICT equipment. I want to see show of hands. How many of you ever heard or read RIPE 554 or RIPE 501? Not many, mostly Europeans. Okay, let's have a look. It took us 1.5 years to make RIPE 501 and 1.5 years to make RIPE 554 as a replacement. It is a set of requirements. It's actually a procurement document that you use it as help when you are setting up the requirements for your equipment at a tender. Check it out. I also have one RFC 6346 together with Randy Bush. That's AP approach to IPv4 depletion. So I'm also familiar with that part of the world. And as I said, I joined the Internet Society in December 2012, and we're trying to put my previous work to a global level and facilitate this stuff. First, shameless plug about Deploy 360 program. We are trying to put on the repository, in addition to BCOP, we're trying to put on the repository where useful documents, validated documents on IPv6, routing, DNSSEC would be published. This is operational deployment site. This is not about fantasies how it should work. This is about how it is deployed and how it must be deployed, how to some case studies and so on. So I invite you to check out the site and see also our roadmap. We just started and we need a good content to put it on. So yeah, I said that. So next areas of work. What I'm responsible in the team for is to facilitate operator-to-operator communication in order to capture the best current operational practice out of deployment that people did. So the lessons learned, how it should be fixed, the solutions that were found in order to work on that. And also, I know it's a bit tough of a mission, but operator to the IETF. IETF needs the improved feedback from the operators, what is actually useful and what is wrong in the standards that they are producing. We saw the opportunity for increased operator feedback, but I will talk about that in a glance. These two processes are related, but we are approaching them as two separate processes that, in my personal opinion, can be addressed as with the same tools. And okay. So the challenge. Well, when I saw Aaron's slides, I said, okay, we will be brothers on stage. We will be saying the same things, basically. So we separately came to the same problem definition. There is no easy way how to find the operational practice document and be sure that it's valid, accurate, and true, right? Because they are spread all over the community. There are verbal conversations in the hallways. There are presentations that are recorded or not. In RIPE region, we make sure we record all the sessions, so yay. We have email lists, we have web forum threads, so the information is scattered around. Also, there is a clutter in the IT landscape, so there is no reliable way of finding these documents. The current status is that also not many written documents are shared with the community. Why? Because lots of enterprises and big companies that deployed IPv6 or any new technology have their own opinion on sharing with the community. They think of this like private, secret, super hidden information, and they are not ready to help their competitor to fix the problems in an easy way. To a certain degree, I could understand that, but we need to find a way around that. So the solution idea is that we believe an organized global repository would be the solution to this problem, and we need to facilitate the work and start the process inside the Nanog communities around the world and encourage them to start writing the documents. This would simplify many things. The search, the information finding, and this would simplify network deployments even for less traveled operators. Make note that these documents should be, or no, must be written by experienced operators and not by philosophers, wizards, and I don't know who never touched UTP patch cable. This should be written by people that actually got their hands dirty and actually deployed these things and are using these things in the production environment. This is the only way we can get something that makes sense, right? And we as an Internet Society Deploy 360 team are committed to assisting the creation and promotion of the global repository, and we are also we will get engaged inside the Nanog communities to help to start this process and to find the people that will run this process like it happened here in your community. That is the first community that is well in front of everybody else. And then step back and take care of the global repository. Now, the second issue that we have, that we see, is And it's not directly related to BCOP, but I think we can fix both things with the same tools. This is about the IETF, for if anyone in the room does not understand what IETF is. This is a standards-making entity, or RFCs comes from the IEDF. Everything that you are using, guys, comes from the IETF, or most of the things. And Internet Society is administrative home of the IETF, and we need to understand that and take care of the processes that are inside the IETF and try to help them to improve these processes. So, we have observed an opportunity for improved communication. There is a myth that operators does not participate in the IETF. This myth is half true. There are operators in the IETF process. They are. But usually the big ones, and as we learned, these operators usually don't have time to prepare well for what they came for to the IETF meeting. And usually they are run over by other people that are well prepared from research organizations, from the vendors, from everybody else. So usually they are not heard well. Even if they try to give some feedback, they are not heard in many cases. And as well, common sense would say that standards could be better designed and better built if the operators would have some word in the process, or would be able to give the feedback and say what is wrong with this stuff. And we understood that, we identified this problem, and we are trying to help, right? Let me go into this area of why operators are not participating in the IETF. It is usually two things: lack of manpower, and because operator needs to be in their NOCs, running their networks, make sure the whole things work. Operators are participating in NOGs, and usually they can't afford to send the best people for 1 week, 3 times a year for IETF meeting. And also, operators relies on vendors. However, you might oppose this sentence. It is true. Operators relies on vendors. Operators talk to their vendors. Sometimes believe the glossy papers and the roadmaps, but operators talk to vendors and tell them what they need. But vendors does not always relay the message to the IETF as it was accepted. So there are hidden agendas, there is politics behind that, there is money attached to that. I would not like to go into this discussion why this is like it is, but it is like it is. So these are the reasons that slows down the operators' feedback to the IETF. So this is one of solution ideas. If Muhammad will not go to the mountain must come to the Muhammad. This is an old saying. That means let's create a discussion group, or a discussion point, or a working group, or a track, or whatever you want to call it, inside RIRs or NOC communities, where operators can actually communicate their needs and wants from the standards processes. So, if we would be able to create these discussion points or working groups like you were able to do it here in Nanog, and I'm really happy that now we have a perfect example for the rest of the world how to do it. We could bring in the presentations from the operators that would present their deployment of new technologies, and that would mean not just to show off on the stage saying, yeah, we deployed it like this, look at me, I'm the best. But that presentation would mean I'm here because I would like to start a document on a best current operational practice, and I'm searching for help. If anyone got the same experiences as I did, I'm inviting him to work together with me to start a BCOP document. And this would be the default intent of the operator presentations in the working group like that. Next thing in the same space would be updates from IETF working group chairs and co-chairs on their work done inside IETF. I've been to some IETF meetings, and if you, as an operator that usually don't have time to follow all the mailing lists and all the discussion inside working group, go to the IETF meeting and you hear the update from draft 02 to draft 03 on one particular, I don't know, internet draft, you would not understand the word, what's going on. So what we are looking here for is to create a platform for interested people from the IETF that would come to Nog meetings and in 5 or 10 minutes present what they are doing there in their working groups. Like, I don't know, HomeNet. Mark Townsley comes to your meeting and uses 5-10 minutes to say, look, we are working on this and this and these issues, right? And then probably somebody in the room would say, oh, I did not know you're working on that. I needed exactly that. Where can I get engaged? Who do I contact? Where do I send an email? No, and this is how the discussion starts. We're also looking for presentation from internet draft authors that are actually interested in evaluating their idea in the community. Again, the requirement is to put the whole idea from start to finish in 5 or 10 minutes presentation and actually explain what they are working on. And maybe somebody in the audience would say, oh, this is exactly what I needed, but I would like it to work on a bit different way. So this is how we establish the communication between standards and you guys, the operators that run the world, right? This is going to be tough. Okay, so presentations from vendors, non-commercial. Why presentation from vendors? I hate commercial presentations, I can tell you. I'm an operator. But during the discussion with some people from some vendors, I found out that there is a certain level of frustration because they would like to standardize things, but then when they get like 10 operators in the room, there are 10 different operators that run 10 different networks, slightly different, and there are 10 different requirements what to standardize. So there is no lowest common denominator agreed. So there is the idea that also the vendors present their frustrations and try to understand from the Nog community on what stuff they should, what would be the lowest common denominator on particular problem that they should standardize it. And also about open discussion about what operators needs for easier deployment of new technologies and features and mechanisms needed in real world. Lots of this stuff is presented at various plenary sessions and is lost in the other clutter. So we would like to bring focused groups together to have this discussion and work on this. So I'm in the end, and we can open the mic for the questions, if there are any questions. Yep.
Lee Howard, Time Warner Cable, several of the things that you listed there too. When you were talking about motivations, why operators don't participate or often don't participate effectively at the IETF, there's another component that that I, as a frequent participant at IETF, run into, which is I don't think when I'm having a problem with an implementation, I don't think of it as a spec problem or a protocol problem most of the time. I think of it as a vendor problem. And if the vendor comes back and says, no, it's working as designed, it's just designed poorly, well then usually I go beat on the vendor rather than go beat on the IETF. And so I can see some benefit here to short-circuiting it, but it requires a mindset change in the potential operator participants to say, as I'm implementing something, if I'm frustrated with something, think about how I would fix it if I were fixing a problem, not just how do I get around the problem that I'm having with this particular implementation. And that's not necessarily I as an operator, not necessarily the mindset that I want to have. I just want to get the thing working because I've got more work to do. Completely different comment. As a working group chair of the IPv6 renumbering working group, I'd be delighted to come and talk. Well, we're sort of winding down, but I'd be delighted to come and talk to this organization, this group, about the work that we have done, get operator feedback. It's a very operations-focused working group. And while I might be able to come to every Nanog and present, I probably can't go to every regional NOG and present. And I'm guessing that you probably are not asking for a commitment from all working group chairs to attend 5 regional operator forums. Of course, there are remote participation opportunities. And of course, there are definitely, as an internet draft author, I would very much like to present ideas for either drafts that I've worked on that are very operational, how to do reverse DNS in IPv6, and ideas for potential future drafts that are maybe sort of even sketchy, ephemeral, not quite put together. Hey, there's need for a document about this, but it's help me decide what the actual BCP is, or how we would like to have DNS or DHCP or something evolve in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee. And yeah, well, it's how to say, if you're willing to do that, you travel to those NOG meetings that you can. Other people from around the world will travel. The working group chairs will travel to other meetings. So, and there should be also some exchange of information or reports from the other similar working groups around the world, so they can exchange what was done previously and so on. And to your first comment, being in operations so long, when I started as a young, invincible engineer, I had no idea that I can make a change, that I can actually get involved in IETF or RIR process and change anything. I was just rambling what are they smoking there when they were standardizing it, or what are they smoking when they were doing the policy in RIR. I had no idea that I can make a difference and go there and take a part in the process and change something. And I still think we need to tell the communities, to young people, young engineers full of energy, that they can make this difference. Thank you.
Ed Lewis from New Star. And for a while, I used to be one of the guys smoking that stuff, working in the IETF, writing specs. And nowadays, I'm on the operator side where I'm wondering what I was smoking when I read the specs back. So I feel a lot of this pain, just to draw on what you're saying. But this really is a big gap for me. In fact, last Nanog, I gave a talk about DNSSEC, how operators use it versus what the specs say. And I did that over the past year. So this really means a lot. I should talk to you afterwards about some other things with DNS, very specific. But I have a question about this approach. And the thing is, incentive for input is what I find is always the hardest thing to provide. Having worked with other discussion areas, other parts of the world, you don't always get the same amount of input at a meeting like you do in Nanog. And it's kind of harder in some places to get information out of people. I think people have things to say. It's whether or not they want to say it to this audience, what that audience is. And then how are you going to let them say, here's how we solve a problem without saying it's wrong, but have others say that's a good idea. Basically show that best current means people vet and say it's a good idea, but let them just say what they want, and some ideas will just get thrown away, and some will keep going on. And that's what's needed, I think. Drawing on some of the IETF stuff where whenever we tried to do a DNS buyer's guide type of thing, it just got laughed at. We could never agree on anything in DNS at the IETF venue. And that's part of where my frustration is coming from.
So when I saw the process proposal from Chris, I immediately added the idea of trying to encourage the BCOP authors to get at least some consensus and try to validate their work in the community. Some things may not be validated because they need to go on a fast track, or they're urgent matters that needs to be published as soon as possible. But some other things, I think, can get the consensus. And I think that the consensus in the community is the most important thing. It's not the fastest process possible, but decisions done on a consensus are the most solid ones, right? So, and for BCOP to promote them to global level, we thought about some committee that would consist out of several different regions from the working group that would evaluate and see which documents from the regions can or should be promoted to the global level.
Just to follow up, when you say the word consensus, the BCOPs don't have to be, this is the only way to do something. This is a really good way to do things. So you can have multiple of them that are accepted. And sometimes they're very domain specific. Like if I'm in North America, I have certain regulations to adhere to and so on, not somewhere else. So we don't necessarily have to have complete cohesive, this is the best way.
Okay.
I think that's what tears down some of the process in other places where they want to have one unified way because that's part and parcel of what they're after. But in this case, I mean, there are many good ways to do something. It's worth saying here were 4 or 5 documents. Any one of those, they are different, but they're all good ways to do whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we are now in questioning mode. I'm set for the next half year to travel around the world to different NOG meetings and to listen and try to put together what the suggestions are for the process and how to approach this issue, right? So expect me in like half a year coming back and saying, look, this is the proposal. This is what I heard around the world. This is what we heard around the world. And if we agree to start. Okay.
Hi, Jan. John Christoph from Team Cummering. To give you some feedback, perhaps, for the one side where you suggested why network operators don't participate, you didn't list a point that I would make for myself as being an operator on and off. I've worked with a few groups, multicast groups, some DNS, some routing stuff. And part of the reason that I find it difficult to participate more in the IETF is that it can be actually quite discouraging when I do attempt to do that. The process can be exceedingly too lengthy. Watching, for example, one of the multicast pieces of work that I had some early input on just went to RFC maybe like a year or two ago, and when I saw it come out, I'm like, oh, my name's on that from like 8 years ago. Forgot all about it. For a spec to take so long, it's just very discouraging to get started on it to begin with when you see that happen. The other couple of cases when I've tried to contribute to specifications a few times, and it may be my own fault or maybe my expectations weren't set, is spending a long time to comment on drafts and then not even seeing like the grammatical changes make it into the next version of the draft is discouraging. When that's happened to me 3 or 4 times, I guess I get the impression that some of the work being done may be not on the behalf of the community sometimes, but someone really has something they're trying to do for themselves or for their organizations. And while maybe it's going a little too far, I think Randy sometimes has a point when he calls it the IVTF.
Yep, exactly. And you know, I personally found also frustrating that for RFC 6346, we needed 2.5 years to get it through, right? Why we needed 2.5 years? Operators were at the point when they were about to decide about the transition mechanism, and they were all deciding for CGN, right? And we wrote the alternative to the CGN, the A+P, and that was not published in a timely manner. So now the CSCOP picked it up and is working on MAP, but it was a year, the process took a year too long. Now, then What I'm hearing, what I hear here is that then we need to understand how to change this process. But this means changing IETF profoundly. Are you committing to that?
So your question is, am I committed to helping change the process? I don't know, maybe. I'm not sure that that process is the thing to change, perhaps. Maybe part of it is what maybe like Aaron's suggesting is kind of a slightly different approach to doing some of this. So a different group sort of gets together. What I was thinking about perhaps would be helpful, and I'll be happy to even attempt this myself, is for someone to come to Nanog or RIPE or Apricot or wherever and say, do a presentation, do a talk that says, here's the latest IETF stuff, work, maybe a sample of 5 important things, the RPKI stuff with BGPSec, Dane and the DNS working group, or whatever, the V6 ops kind of stuff, and just talk about it and at least open that dialogue here. I think that might be helpful. I don't know that the process itself, I'm not too encouraged by changing that, to be quite frankly.
Okay, so we agree. That's exactly what we propose. So yeah, this is okay. Thank you. Other questions? Then thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Okay, so this really is on 2 fronts, right? One is a local, a regional BCOP process, and one is a process by which regional BCOP organizations can help make things globally available or create a global standard to refer to, use, give to other people, whatever. One thing that's not entirely clear based on the feedback so far is, does this sound reasonable? Is this the right thing? This is supposed to be, community-driven, not, a few guys trying to figure this out on the side. So it's really important that you stand up and say this sucks or this is great, and give us some guidance as volunteers, as members of the community, or participate and help out. There's certainly been a lot of discussion over the years on some small lists, and I'm going to move those to Nanog today, actually, for that discussion to continue. But I'd love to hear, if we're doing something wrong, please stand up and make a suggestion for what the right way is, or say, keep going. I'd love some actual feedback for this. Crickets. Awesome.
I've already spoken. You
Yes.
Yeah, David Barak, AT&T Consulting. Just as a question, one of the things I've heard so far is people talking about writing specs for new things, but my understanding is that we were talking about the best current practices. So we'd really be talking about the documentation. Are we not talking about the documentation of what's out there now?
So again, this is community. So the original vision was the big picture. How do we fix the global internet? Right? How do we make it really easy for anybody who needs information on an operational best practice to find it? Now, that might be really common things like, how do we implement egress egress filters, update IRR data, set up RPKI, whatever they are, like sort of standard set of operational guidelines to say, here's an 80-20 model and a place that you can go for definitive reference on how to. And everything that's current and common falls into that area. Whether that's regional or global is a whole different issue, right?
Because I think if you asked for a call for volunteers to write up the how-tos, you could probably get a decent pool of volunteers who would do that, as opposed to the newest, more cutting-edge stuff.
Absolutely. So this is a call for that as well, right? There are several different areas of interest. Right? One is find subject matter experts who are willing to take the time to write documents and share them. Right? There's another set that is find people that are willing to say, this does or doesn't fall in that 80-20 model, right? To actually vet the documents, so you don't just have somebody writing something and going, here you go, this is definitive and done and vetted, move forward. And then there are other aspects of it, which are how do we facilitate a best current operational practices development process regionally, and who is interested in helping define a best current operational practices development process globally, and what do those two things look like? So yes, this is a call for volunteers. If you're willing to write documents, absolutely fantastic. If you're willing to go find people outside of these organizational areas that you believe are subject matter experts and could help the world get a little cleaner, a little better, make the internet nice, great. Thank you very much. Please drag them in, sign them up to the list, and get them to write something. If you would like to change the way we're doing this, change the format, think we're nuts, think this is great, and want to just help, that's great too. This is really however you contribute. Like, this is the finest thing that you could do for volunteer service for the better of the global internet and your community, is take some time and spend it here, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Lee Howard again. I think you pretty much answered what I was going to say, because I'm hearing two different sets of activities, and there was a question about how do we motivate participation. And it sounds like for some set of people, once there's a document, once there's a draft document, getting people to read it, especially if they know there's going to be a discussion at a meeting, getting people to read it, well, we have mixed results at the IETF, but some people have been to the IETF. But knowing that here's the agenda, these documents will be discussed, we'll discuss a certain document, completely different than, say, an ARIN public policy consultation, which is, does anybody have any ideas they might want to talk about, and just sort of shoot some, float some things and see what gets shot down and what gets brought up, which would be where new stuff might come from. People are, I think, it may be easier, and I'm sort of asking you, but also asking here, so there's a difference between commenting and contributing to an existing document, which can be done in a meeting kind of forum or on a mailing list, and batting ideas around, which is much better suited for a conversation in a forum like this. Are we talking about the same things?
Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge with bottoms up open community, right? Is that you have to start somewhere. So starting on something like a discuss and saying, is this the process you're looking for, is fine, but nobody really speaks up until something's broken. Just as much as if I wanted a document written on something, all I have to do is write one that's entirely wrong and present it as being right, and I'll have 300 people coming up to me telling me where I can shove it. So how do you want to start this? That's again, up to the community. And I think the lists are a good place to start, right? You start with a discuss list, and if that turns into individual working groups that get pulled out, or particular subject matter expert areas that gets pulled out, great, right? It's up to this community to drive how this community wants to manage that kind of thing.
Is there a list of documents needing drafting or starting or something?
No? Want to create one?
My thought was, that, gee, there's this mailing list that I've heard of, Nanog.
Yes.
And if you subscribe to Nanog, is it Nanog-L? I don't remember what the mailing list is called. If you subscribe to that list, once or twice a week, somebody says, how do I something? And if there's any kind of discussion at all, or if it's even so bleedingly obvious that it's exactly the wrong venue, that may be the perfect topic to just slap up on a page someplace saying documents needing drafting, and then somebody can jump in and start using Scribed or a wiki or whatever the appropriate tool is, or XML, because XML to RFC is such an easy tool to use, and start making that happen, and start from there as, gee, we've got our topics being suggested to us every few days.
Absolutely. So walking away from this room, assuming that there is some flavor of Nanog regional support, and you all aren't walking out of the room going, what the heck are they talking about? We're going to ask for support from Nanog to put up web pages to facilitate those kind of things, and lists to facilitate those kind of things. We've just started with the request for a discuss and an announce, but it's up to the members of this community. Yeah, absolutely.
So, thank you. Lee, something triggered this thought in me, what you said. I remember the exercise in the RIPE community, how to get people involved with RIPE 501, 554, right? With 501, we got reasonable amounts of feedback. A few people got engaged, but it was like, in the community, okay, if you have time, you comment. If you don't have time, you don't comment. You engage some cycles, maybe not, right? If it's too long, then you say, okay, I'll read it later, and you never read it again. And we came after a year and a half to a reasonable consensus, well, very strong consensus in the community that we need to publish something else. This was an ongoing live document, and we decided to publish something and not babysit it forever. However, this document was so well spread around the world that it was translated into more than 10 languages, right? All around the world, governments, enterprises started using it. And it got legs, and all of a sudden, when we started the replacement document that was later known as 554, all of a sudden, huge amount of people wanted to comment it. And they wanted to get engaged just to put their name on the acknowledgement section, right? Have a look into 554, the amount of people that is in acknowledgement section. And, if we produce the first version of a document that gets some sort of consensus and becomes successful and used, you can then improve it, and the community will be interested in this, especially vendors, in my case.
Okay, so other comments, questions before moving on? All right, I'm going to ask Chris Grundeman present a suggested draft for a regional BCOP development process after lots of feedback we've gotten from people on list. And this is to comment on how you'd like to drive the local process. So this is when you speak up. This is either things get done or things don't, but nothing gets done without community support. So this is when you stand up and yell at Chris or the room and say you're right or you're wrong, and we're participating or not. And with that, Chris.
Thanks, Aaron. Jan? Yeah, so as Aaron said, I think what we've talked about a little bit here today is there's kind of, in my view anyway, kind of three pieces what we're talking about here. One is, the regional process for creating BCOPs and documenting them and putting them in some place where people can actually find them. And then another one is doing that at a global level. And then the third one is using that as operational feedback back into forums like the IETF. And so this is specific to a Nanog-focused regional BCOP working group and how we will develop those BCOPs. And this is a first draft. It's based on quite a bit of other work. And basically what we've tagged it for now is the Nanog BCOP development process. And again, the idea here is to bring forth, right, suss out all of this useful network engineering knowledge that's out there and put it up in one place where it can actually be found. And the document itself, the development process itself, borrows heavily from the ARIN policy development process, because that's something that seems to work fairly well with community input and community feedback as an ongoing process for keeping a living document current and working. Previous to this, as Aaron said, this has been going on for a number of years now, and we created a development process that this is now being basically a revised version of that. And the way it's structured is in two pieces. So there's a development process fundamentals, kind of the foundation for a Nanog BCOP working group, kind of a common set of ideals and goals, and then the actual process itself. So in the current draft of the document, which again, as soon as we move everyone who's on the current mailing list over to the new mailing list, we'll send this out, and everyone can start beating on it directly in the actual text. But I want to run through kind of the highlights here of what we've contained, and again, as Aaron said, this is, at any point here, feel free to jump up if there's anything on any of these sections that seems like it's out of line or doesn't mesh with what we've talked about here today or what your vision of this would be. Now is a great time to start that conversation. So the purpose I already talked about quite a bit. So if we dig into the philosophy, one of the first things is being free from organizational agendas. So I think we've heard a couple of things here that there may be some specific organizations who influence other organizations. And we want to be ensure that any BCOPs that are written reflect actual operational reality and experiences. All right, so we're synthesizing the knowledge from the entire community. Again, overall for the upper levels, for the entire global network engineering community, but more localized to the regional area as well. It needs to be available to everyone, and it needs to be communal knowledge. And then, of course, one of the goals of all of this, right, why even do this, is we believe that, creating this knowledge or this repository of knowledge and allowing folks to find it easily as they're building and operating networks around the world will help advance the internet and push it out further into more and more areas and have it run better in all those areas. So what would be the scope of such a working group here within Nanog? Again, publicly available community-regulated documents, synthesizing the knowledge of real-world network engineering best practices, ongoing living documents that are scrutinized and revised over time, and to an earlier point as well, these would not be rules by any stretch of the imagination. Right? These are intended to provide good advice about operational practices, call out exceptions where they're notable, and move on. I think they need to be based on 4 general principles: the openness, transparency, bottom-up, and ongoing, the same principles that everything else in the internet is based on. I think those are all fairly straightforward, and the ones that were added in Aaron's slides were regional and global, and then obviously consensus-based feeds into both of these as well. The last part of the fundamentals section really is the criteria for publishing a BCOP, which I think need to be fairly strict, but there's not a lot there. Really, we need clear and technically sound documents, and the way to judge if they're clear and technically sound is through consensus through the community, discussion, and people agreeing that, yes, that's really a good way to do that. And then obviously being developed through this open and transparent process so that it's capable for people to jump in and say yes or no, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, that's a horrible way of doing it, or that is the right way to do it. So we did get a little bit into more of the nitty-gritty of the process here. We're introducing some new terms. There's a concept here of a steering committee, right? Some kind of organization, a group of people appointed by the community in some form that will be kind of the gatekeepers of what is a published BCOP and what shouldn't be published. Or there needs to be somebody who judges if that consensus exists or not. Obviously, subject matter experts are the ones we want writing these documents, and each document's going to need a shepherd. Because if you have a small group, a small steering committee that's kind of the gating factor, they're obviously not going to be able to keep track of every single document if this is successful. If we have a lot of documents being produced, especially at first, we'll need each document to have its own shepherd, which may or may not be a subject matter expert or a member of the steering committee. So with that kind of as the foundation and the background of a Nanog BCOP working group, what does the process then look like? Right? So I think, and again, all of this is rough, this is ongoing, this is just our idea being put forth, and we really want feedback into this process because obviously building the development process is going to be the keystone of how this moves forward going into the future. So I think we start with an appeal, move to a draft BCOP, a candidate BCOP, publish the BCOP, and then obviously there needs to be an update process. So what's an appeal? An appeal is basically a question, right? How do I do this? Lee's example from the mailing list I think is a great one because as I've started working over the last several years with Aaron and others on this BCOP process, I've noticed those emails, and now they always stick out to me. And within the Nanog forum or other forums, there's a lot of this going on where someone says, hey, how do I do this? And there happens to be usually a handful or half a dozen or even more people who know how to do it, but it's not, they don't just usually provide a link, they explain it every single time. And so when that question gets asked, the idea then is to collect those into this Nanog Regional BCOP working group, collect those questions, and then move them forward, right? So what they would be moving forward to would be a draft BCOP. So any appeal, any question that gets asked in the community that has significant community interest, that is, not overly broad or overly specific. If it's too specific, the document's not worth reading. If it's overly broad, we're all of a sudden trying to document how the internet works, which doesn't usually work. It needs to be relevant to the community, it needs to be vendor neutral, and there has to be someone willing to take this on and shepherd it through the process. If an appeal meets those criteria, the steering committee would then select it as a draft BCOP. The shepherd would go out and recruit subject matter experts to help fill in the blanks and answer the question, outline and draft that text, and then discuss it right on the mailing list, maybe bring it to meetings, keep the discussion going until some consensus starts to coalesce around, yes, these are good answers, this is a good way of doing it, which is when it would become a candidate BCOP. So again, the steering committee would be the one who judges this based on community feedback. Before a draft BCOP should move from the discussion phase into the consensus building phase, it really needs to answer the question fully and completely. Any objections that are raised, right? Anyone who says, no, this is not a good way to do it, either they need to add their exception or help draft new text or just generally pound all that out and make sure that we're actually coalescing on a solution that makes sense and that works. And then, of course, it needs to be scoped to the original question. It needs to be vendor neutral. There can't be proprietary solutions in here, but that doesn't really help, at least not for the operator community at large. And then, just follow a regular process of posting text a couple of weeks before the Nanog meeting, discussing it at the meeting, and moving to a last call after the meeting. It seems to be a very well-formed process for discussing documents at in-person meetings as a gating factor for those documents moving forward, which would then bring it to being published. So again, rough consensus on the mailing list and within the meeting with no major objections, no reasonable outrage if the answer is wrong. And then again, do the 2-week text freeze before a meeting, talk about it at the meeting, 2-week last call, and again, those durations are just placeholders for now, whatever makes sense. And then again, publish it somewhere where everyone can find it, in a place where it'll be searchable, right? So you want the search engines to be able to find it, but you also want an easy URL where you can point people to it and say, this is where you go to find operational information within our region. And then, of course, the final phase would be to cycle this all back when, technology changes, when an operator finds a better answer, whatever the case may be. Obviously, these are intended to be living documents that are going to be changed on an ongoing basis. And so an appeal will then also be submitted to say, hey, I have a problem with an existing BCOP, and we need to fix it, or perhaps even retire it. That would just follow through the exact same process, for the most part. An update will be slightly different. That's it. So that is what we've outlined as kind of a draft development process for BCOPs in the Nanog region. And the next step is for folks to review it and provide feedback starting here. And yes, we mean you. So are there any comments, questions, rotten fruit in your briefcase?
Hi, Steve Powell, Level 3. This is just a bit of musing because I'm making an analogy to sort of the medical community and some of the the PubMed drafts and some of the other, well, I'll call it consensus ideas. And sometimes, there'll be let's say a monolithic answer that comes out as a result, let's say, of a lot of internal debate, when internally or behind the scenes there still might be a lot of contentious, divisive debate or differentiations about what is the actual answer, the best answer, and you just have those different factions spinning off. So one of my musings is maybe instead of not just a consensus, if there is some type of debate and it's a significant division on what really is the best practice, for somehow that history to be saved, so that if someone really wants to do some additional thinking and other than saying, well, what was the consensus, I can actually go and see, hey, there were actually 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4 or 5 potential best practice solutions forwarded, and this is just what happened to win.
Absolutely. I think to that point, I think one of the reasons why the mailing list needs to be public and needs to be archived is contained in that. And then 2, I think anything that is contentious, right, if there's not a single answer, that the desire here is to document it. So documented exceptions within the BCOP document itself is extremely important, and I think should be part of the process. So if we say, okay, 80% of the time you can do this, or maybe it's split, and you say, okay, we actually have 2 answers, and then there's still these major exceptions where in this case, this doesn't work, and in this case doesn't work, and try and document to our best of our ability that debate in kind of a final form in the document.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking for, because I think there might be certain topics where one answer doesn't fit all, and there may be cases where doing something significantly different from what is the majority case might actually work out for some group of people. I'd hate for them to go off the wrong way, and we see that in other facets. Again, I just use the medical field as a good example where there is, as of today, even for things that we take for granted, there are always going to be groups of people say, hey, look, no, it's this other thing, and it's good for that debate to continue.
Absolutely.
Lee Howard, I'm sorry for coming back again. I don't like the word appeal as the way to kick off the process. Appeal sounds to me like what you do at the end of the process if you didn't get the result you like. I would prefer call or question or oye or last call. Start with last call. That'd be Thanks, Chris. There's my feedback.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, sorry, Richard.
Hi, Richard Jimerson from the Internet Society. I'm in favor of this type of work. I wanted to say that I think it's great what's going on inside this community. I think it's very important work. I've been hearing people for over a decade asking for these types of things. I did work with Aaron for 13 years, and I spoke to thousands of people inside this region. And I had thousands of people over time ask for exactly this, what you guys are talking about doing right now. They would love to hear from more experienced operators that travel and talk to each other more than they have the resources to do, to learn from that and actually deploy things in their networks. That's not what I came to the microphone to talk about. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to point back to some of the things that Sally Wentworth talked about earlier today, and the increased interest that governments have in what operators do. Operators, they really don't want to have the government come in and state what it is that they should be doing, how they should be operating their networks. But I think everyone here would agree that in the coming years, it's going to become more and more difficult to keep governments outside of the fold. They're going to want to say things. They're going to want to perhaps mandate things and become more involved in what everyone in this room does. And it may not happen in the North American region, but it might happen somewhere else first. There's going to come a time when a government actually wants to mandate an operational practice inside its borders. And I just want to pose that if that were to happen, I would much rather them point to something that the people in this room drafted and published than something that they created themselves without the feedback of people inside this room.
Thanks, Richard. Well, since there's not long lines at the microphones, let's try the lazy way. If you are in support of continued work on a best current operational practices development process in the Nanog region, would you kindly raise your hand? Lovely, thank you. If you are in support of continued work on a best current operational development process to send things from a regional BCOP to a global BCOP, please raise your hand. Okay. It would be fantastic if you would join the BCOP list on nanog.org by either emailing bcop-subscribe@nanog.org or going to nanog.org/mailman/listinfo/BCOP and subscribing yourself if you would like to participate in this process further. As we start to split out topics like document authoring versus the process itself and where things live, we will certainly spin up other lists as they get needed. But at a minimum, if you don't want to participate while it's being developed, please do subscribe to the announced list And we'll announce as other forums come up or URLs or other lists so that you'll at least be aware of those things spinning up. And if there's nothing else, I thank you all very much for your time. Yes, Eric. Sorry.
Psych.
Psych.
Yeah, Eric Osting, Network Utility Force. I'd like to, I suppose, point out something that's probably obvious to everyone in the room. All this process is only useful if we have, BCOPs to send to other regions. So I know Aaron invited everyone to take the time and write something, and certainly I haven't written anything myself, so I can't say anything. But it's important. This work is wasted if we don't have BCOPs or BCOPs. Apologize, Aaron, to actually use and send around. So think about ways that you can just get something started that we can all crowd around and then work on together and go from there.
Yeah, or even like, I wish my customer would do this in this standard way. Consider typing out an email. Even if you're not actually describing what needs to be done, sending an email off to the list saying, God, I wish my customer would set up egress, egress filters this way, roughly, and someone else would probably help pick that up and turn it into a draft. Thanks, Eric. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Chris.
I think we did a good job.